Sophia did not make a sound. Not when Rupert's voice cut across the supper room at Bellamy Hall, clear enough that the musicians faltered mid-phrase. Not when the dancing stopped. Not when 40-some guests of Savannah's finest families turned to look at her in the same moment. The way a crowd turns toward its senses is about to break. She set down her glass. She smoothed the front of her dress. She curtsied, low, deliberate, the curtsy her mother had drilled into her until her knees ached, the one reserved for people of consequence. And she said, quietly enough that only Rupert could hear, "As you wish, Mr. Crane." Then she walked away. The evening had started the way autumn suppers in Savannah always started in the fall of 1820, with cooler air off the river for the first time in months, with the particular relief that settles over a room when the heat has finally broken, and with the easy laughter of people who have been comfortable long enough that comfort has become invisible to them. Sophia Mallory Crane had arrived on Rupert's arm, as she always did. She had dressed carefully. The dark blue silk that suited her better than anything he had ever chosen for her, the small silver pin that had belonged to her mother, her hair pinned in the way Tilda said suited the shape of her face. She had spent an hour preparing, not because she expected Rupert to notice. She had given up expecting that somewhere around the 5th month of their marriage. She had done it because she represented the Crane name tonight, and Sophia Mallory had been raised to do a thing, properly or not at all. Their marriage had been her father's arrangement, which was a polite way of saying it had been a transaction. Her father owed Rupert's family a debt he could not repay in cash. Sophia had been 23 and had not been asked. She had been informed, in the careful way of men who have already decided a thing and tell you as a courtesy before someone else does. She had married Rupert Crane in March of 1818, arrived at his household, found it in quiet disorder, and had set it in order. That was the shape of the 2 years and 3 months that followed, careful, useful, unacknowledged. She had known Arabella Whitfield would be there that evening. She had known it the way you know a headache is coming, a pressure behind the eyes, a tightening in the chest with no clean name. Arabella was a widow of 31 with the particular confidence of a woman who has outlived one wealthy husband and is actively considering the next. She had been making her interest in Rupert plain for the better part of a year. Sophia had said nothing about it. She had considered saying something. Each time she had decided that raising the subject would look like jealousy and be received as jealousy, and would cost her more than whatever Arabella was doing quietly in the background. That calculation had been wrong. She would not understand the full shape of its wrongness until much later. What she understood on the carriage ride home, not from anyone, just from the silence of a woman sitting alone putting pieces together, was that Arabella had shown Rupert letters. Letters that appeared to place Sophia in private correspondence with a man named Denton, a shipping clerk her father had employed years ago, who had in fact written to her twice about her father's estate after his death. She had written back. The correspondence had been entirely about inheritance documents, but taken out of context, arranged with care, presented by a woman who had Rupert's ear and his trust. The letters had done exactly what they were designed to do. Tilda was awake when Sophia arrived home. One look at Sophia's face and she moved to the wardrobe without asking a single question. "Not those," Sophia said. "We're packing tonight." Tilda turned, read her face again, and said simply, "How much?" "What's mine?" Sophia said. "Only what's mine." They worked for 2 hours in near silence. Sophia was systematic about it, because she had always been systematic, even about grief, even about the end of things. She took her mother's silver pin, the one she had worn to the wedding and never worn since, because Rupert had said it looked plain, and her father's Bible, and the 4 books that had her name written inside the front cover. She took her personal correspondence. She took the household ledgers she had maintained for 2 years in her own handwriting, every column, every arrangement, because those ledgers were entirely her creation, and she had a right to them. She did not take the pearl necklace Rupert had given her on their wedding day. She left it on the dresser. It had never quite felt like hers, and she saw no reason to start pretending otherwise at 2 in the morning. She sat at her writing desk and drafted a letter, 3 sentences, then 4, then 6, and she stopped, because 6 was enough to say everything that needed saying without saying what wasn't hers to say for him. She left it on the desk and did not read it over. Cyrus the coachman was awake in the stable yard and stood up the moment he saw her coming alone. "Mrs. Crane," he said in the voice of a man who has decided not to ask. "I'll need you to take me to my aunt's in Midland County," she said. "Just me." He didn't ask about Mr. Crane. The carriage moved through the Georgia dark, and Sophia sat with her hands in her lap and watched the stars through the small window. She had loved the night sky in Savannah since she first arrived from Charleston. So many more stars, so much closer to the land, as though the sky here pressed down to meet. She had tried to tell Rupert that once, early in the marriage. He had made a polite sound that made clear he hadn't been listening. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant to begin a sentence, and watch someone's attention slide away before you reached the end of it. She thought about all the versions of herself she had slowly stopped offering, because they seemed to cost more than they were welcome. She thought, I am 25 years old. I am not doing this again. Her Aunt Luella Brandt had been widowed at 35, and had built around what remained a life of such deliberate self-sufficiency that the county had eventually stopped being surprised by it. She had said something at Sophia's wedding, very quietly, near the end of the night. If you ever need a door, mine is open. Sophia had not known what to do with it then. She had been hopeful. She had been 23. Now she knew exactly what to do with it. Rupert Crane did not sleep that night. By 6 in the morning he dressed without ringing for his valet, and went downstairs and found Mrs. Gabbard, his housekeeper of 11 years, standing in the corridor with her hands folded, and an expression he had never once seen on her face before. She looked shaken. He asked for Sophia. Mrs. Crane is not in the house, sir, Mrs. Gabbard said. She left last night. She left a letter. The letter was on the writing desk in her sitting room, a room, he realized with a slow, uncomfortable awareness, he had not entered in several months. His name on the front in her handwriting, the most legible hand he had ever seen, even spaced unhurried even now. He broke the seal. Rupert, you have made your decision plain, and I accept it. I have taken only what belongs to me. The household accounts are current through the end of the month. Mrs. Gabbard has the November provisioning arrangements. Nothing has been left undone. I wish you well. Sophia Mallory. She had signed it with her maiden name. He read it twice. Then he stood there for a long time with the letter in his hand, thinking about a woman who had packed her things at midnight and still made sure the household accounts were current before she left. Thinking about what kind of person does that. The household revealed itself over the days that followed. The kitchen produced meals that were correct, but not quite right in a quality he couldn't name, until he realized he had never had to name it, because Sophia had been quietly overseeing it for 2 years, without ever calling attention to the fact. He needed a supply contract from his correspondence files, and spent half an hour looking before Mrs. Gabbard told him, with a neutrality that had a decided edge in it, that Mrs. Crane had always maintained those files and she herself didn't know the system. He found the contract eventually. It had been exactly where logic dictated, in an arrangement so precise it was almost architectural, dated, cross-referenced, every entry in Sophia's even handwriting. He stood with the file in his hands and thought about what it had taken to build a thing that orderly, about the fact that he had been living inside it for 2 years, and had never once thought to ask who had made it. On the 5th day he called on Arabella Whitfield. He arrived without warning and sat in her parlor and said, "Tell me exactly what you showed me, word for word, from the beginning." By the end of that conversation he understood 3 things. The letters were real, but their meaning had been constructed. Arabella had been building that construction for the better part of a year, and he had wanted a reason. Not for any motive he could name honestly, but because he had been unhappy in the marriage, and had not known how to say so. And when someone handed him an explanation that put all the fault cleanly outside himself, he had taken it without asking a single question. He sat in his study that evening, and thought about the pearl necklace on the dresser in Sophia's room. He had gone in once looking for a document, and found it lying there in its box exactly where she had left it, and he had looked at it and looked away quickly, the way you look away from something that might, if you let yourself see it fully, be more than you're ready to account for. He thought about 6 sentences signed with a maiden name. He thought about the Hennessy file, and the cross-referenced correspondence, and the kitchen that didn't quite run right without her. He started writing. He crossed out 4 drafts before he produced something honest. He addressed it to Sophia Mallory, because that was how she had signed her letter, and he understood that he needed to meet her on the ground she had chosen. Luella received Sophia without questions and without ceremony. She made tea. She showed her the spare room. She went back to her own work, which was the most tactful thing anyone had done for Sophia in some time. In the days that followed, Sophia reorganized Luella's still room, which had been in considerable disorder. She sat evenings with an old man named Amos, who lived in the cottage at the property edge, and who had a gift for arriving at important truths from the side, without startling them, and she began teaching Fern. Fern was 12, the daughter of a tenant farmer, 2 properties over. She had appeared at Luella's door on the 4th morning, with a primer and an expression of such carefully managed hope that Sophia had simply stepped back and said, "Come in, sit down. Let's start from the beginning." Fern was quick and serious, and had apparently decided that this was important enough to treat accordingly. Within a week she was working through her letters, with the concentration of someone who understands what she is being given. Teaching her, Sophia found that something compressed in her chest for 2 years was slowly releasing. She had been good at this always. The patient attention, the genuine interest in what a person thinks once they have the words to say it. She had been pouring that quality into the Crane household and feeling like water going into sand. Out here, something remained. Rupert's first letter arrived on a Tuesday. She read it twice and said nothing to anyone. His second came a week later, longer, more carefully written, or rather less carefully written, in the way that meant he had stopped arranging himself before putting words down. In it he had confirmed everything about the Denton correspondence. 2 witnesses. The notary who had handled her father's estate. He had done this, he wrote, not to prove anything to her, but because he owed it to himself to know the full shape of his own error. She read that line 3 times. She looked for the place where the accounting turned into a case for what she owed him in return. She didn't find it. A neighbor, Dinah Katie, came to call on a Thursday with dried herbs and the expression of a woman who knows she owes something and has come to begin paying it. "I didn't say a word at Bellamy Hall," Dinah said, when they were sitting with the tea and Luella had found somewhere else to be. "I saw it coming and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business." She looked at Sophia directly. "I've thought about that quite a bit since." She also came, she said, because Arabella Whitfield had been telling a careful version of events in Savannah's drawing rooms, told with sympathy, in the register of concern, about reasons and more to these situations than people see. The county was listening. Sophia sat with her hands flat on the table after Dinah left. She thought about 2 years of keeping herself so small, so correct, so relentlessly beyond reproach that no one would ever have reason to question her. And here was Arabella in the county's parlors, planting doubt anyway. She thought about silence, about how she had confused being quiet with being safe, and how those 2 things had turned out not to be the same thing at all. She wrote a letter that evening to Judge Morton, who had been at Bellamy Hall, who had looked at her that night with something she had read as pity and was now reconsidering, and who had been her father's acquaintance before anything else. She stated facts only. She asked for nothing except his willingness to speak with her about a matter of public record. She gave it to the postman in the morning. It was Cyrus who moved things forward. He came to Rupert 10 days after Sophia left, asked to speak plainly, and Rupert, something in his voice, said yes. Cyrus said that he had driven Mrs. Crane out of that house before 3 in the morning and had not had an easy day's work since, and that he wanted to know whether Mr. Crane intended to set things right, or whether Cyrus should start looking for a position where a man's conscience and his employment didn't pull in different directions. Rupert stared at him, could not answer, and in not being able to answer, understood that he had been unable to answer that question for himself for 10 days, and that the not answering was its own kind of answer, and that it was time to stop. He rode to Luella Brandt's property on his own horse in plain clothes, without anyone to see him do it. Sophia was in the front room with Fern when she heard the horse on the road. She finished the word they were working through, asked Fern to write it 3 times on her own, dried her hands, and went to the door. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping and had stopped bothering to hide it. "I'd like to speak with you," he said, "if you're willing." "You rode 9 miles, she said. "Come around to the side yard." They walked along the edge of Luella's garden in the November morning, the sky high and cold above the bare pecan trees. He spoke without arranging himself first, which she noted. "I accepted a story without asking a single question," he said. "Not because the evidence was solid, because I wanted a reason. I was unhappy in the marriage, and I didn't know how to say so. And Arabella handed me something that put all the fault clearly outside of me, and I used it in front of 40 people who mattered." He stopped walking. "What I did was wrong. Entirely my own doing, from start to finish." "Yes," Sophia said, "it was." He looked at her. "What do you want? Not what you're willing to accept. What do you actually want?" She held his gaze. "I want my name cleared, publicly, before Arabella's version of events becomes the story the county settles on. Done properly by someone with the standing to do it." Judge Morton, he said. I've already written to him. Then I'll follow with my own account. He paused. And Arabella understands now that continuing will cost her more than she's willing to pay. She won't continue. All right, Sophia said. All right means I will wait to see what you do, not what you say you'll do, what you do. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man settling into something rather than moving past it. That's fair, he said. I know it is, she said. Judge Morton held the meeting on a Friday. He sent notes to 8 households without explaining why, and by Wednesday the county was trying to work out what was happening and failing. Sophia arrived with Luella. Dinah Katie was there, and Calvin Birch, who had been Rupert's closest friend, and who had come to Rupert 3 days earlier, with the particular expression of a man delivering honest news, and watching you choose what to do with it. Rupert was not yet in the room. Sophia understood later that Morton had placed him elsewhere on purpose. Morton stood at the front of his parlor and addressed them without ceremony. He stated what the facts were. He stated that he had reviewed the correspondence in question and spoken to 3 witnesses, and was prepared to say for the record, before these people, in this room, that there was not a single verifiable fact supporting any suggestion of impropriety on Sophia Mallory's part, not one. What existed instead was evidence of a story deliberately constructed and circulated. The door opened. Rupert walked in. He did not look comfortable. He looked like a man who had decided that comfort was not the point. He looked at Sophia first, before anyone else in that room. Then he turned to face the assembled group and spoke plainly. He said what he had done, and how he had done it, and that it had been wrong in every particular. He said the story told to him had been false, that he had confirmed this within 10 days. And that he was saying so now in this company, because Sophia deserved to have the record corrected in the same place it had been damaged. What happened at Bellamy Hall was wrong, he said. Mrs. Crane did nothing to deserve it, not that evening, and not in the 2 years before it. Calvin Birch cleared his throat into the silence that followed. Took something to say that plainly, Rupert, he said. Rupert looked at him. Should have happened sooner, he said. The room adjusted, not dramatically, but in the particular way of people who had braced for one thing and found something more honest than they had expected. After the room emptied, Rupert crossed toward Sophia. She waited until he was close. That was done well, she said. She meant it exactly as much as she said it, and no more. It was the minimum of what was owed, he said. Yes, she said. I'm glad you understood that. He looked at her. What do you want, Sophia? Not what would be reasonable. What do you actually want? She had thought about this. She had been thinking about it for 3 weeks. 3 visits, she said. Come to Luella's. No agenda, no expecting any particular outcome. Come and talk the way people should talk when they are genuinely trying to know each other. After those 3 visits, I'll tell you what I've decided. He was quiet for a moment. When does the first one begin? You're already standing in it, she said. He stayed 2 hours. They talked without arrangement or performance. About his father, whose coldness Rupert laid out like a map of country he had been living in without knowing its name. About Charleston and her father's study, and the opinions she had arrived in Savannah with, and had slowly, month by month, been made to put away. He listened. At the right moment he asked one question and waited for the full answer. Luella said nothing when he left. She poured the tea. Then, he listened more than he talked. For 2 hours, Sophia said. In my experience, Luella said, that's harder for men like him than most of what they'd call hard. The second visit, he asked about Fern. Not as a gesture, but because Luella had mentioned her, and something in the telling had caught him. He described going into a small room he had always passed without thinking about, and finding 2 old primers on the lowest shelf with his mother's name written inside the front cover. She had died when he was 8. His father had not encouraged discussion of her. He told this carefully, without self-pity, just a man accounting for a part of himself he had not previously examined. She would have liked Fern, Sophia said. He looked at her, and something in his face opened in a way she didn't have a word for. Yes, he said quietly. I think she would have. She went for a long walk that afternoon and thought about a boy growing up in a house where grief had no room, and a small schoolroom that had sat locked for decades. She was not making excuses for him. She would never do that. But she had learned here, in 6 weeks of living her own life, that understanding and accountability were not opposites. You could hold both. You could understand a thing and still require it never happen again. The third visit came on a cold Wednesday morning in December. She knew before he arrived that this one would be different. Knew it the way she knew things now, without having to argue herself into it. They walked the edge of Luella's land in the pale December light, the pecan trees bare above them. He was quiet at first. She let him be. She had learned the difference between his quiets, and this one was not avoidance. It was preparation. When he spoke, he said, "I was at my desk last month, trying to write to you. I couldn't find the right words, so I went to the window the way I do when I'm stuck, and I looked out at everything, the land, the house, all of it, and I thought about whether any of it meant what I had always assumed it meant." He paused. "And then I thought about you walking out of Bellamy Hall. About the letter signed with your maiden name. About the accounts left current and nothing left undone." He stopped walking. "And I thought, that is what it looks like when a person knows who they are. I don't know who I am the way you do. I'm not sure I ever have." She stopped walking. She turned to face him. "I'm not a mirror," she said. "I'm not here to reflect you back at yourself. If you come back to me, you come back to a woman with her own life, and her own work, and her own mind that does not exist in service to yours." "I know that," he said. "That's not what I mean." "I know it isn't," she said. "I'm saying it so we're both clear." He nodded. "Are you going to tell me what you've decided?" She looked at the bare trees. She looked at the small house behind her where she had spent 6 weeks becoming the fullest version of herself again. She looked at the road going east 9 miles to a house she had left before dawn with 2 trunks and a letter in 6 sentences. Then she turned back to him. "Here are my terms," she said. "Not conditions for a trial. Terms for a real thing if you want one." She held his gaze. "I continue teaching, whatever form it takes, wherever I am. That work is mine to determine and yours to stay out of unless I ask. Tilda comes back with me. Her position is permanent and not subject to discussion. The household accounts carry both our names. I will not manage money I have no formal claim to. She let each one land before moving to the next. And I speak. When something is wrong, I say so directly, and I expect to be heard. Not managed. Heard." He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said, just that word. Plain, unadorned, without the social ease she had spent 2 years watching him perform in every room he entered. Just a man saying yes and meaning it with everything he had left. She looked at him for a long time. "I choose this freely," she said. "Not from obligation, not because it is expected. I have looked at you honestly for 6 weeks and I see something worth choosing. That is the only reason." She held his gaze. "When I come back to the house at the end of the month, I come back as Sophia Mallory Crane. Both names. Neither one erased." "Both names," he said. He said it the way you say the name of something you intend to honor. She turned back toward the house. He walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside. Fern was coming up the path with her primer and her serious December face, ready for the lesson. She looked at Rupert with the frank, assessing gaze of a 12-year-old who has decided she will not be impressed by people simply for being older or richer. She looked at Sophia. She looked back at Rupert. "Are you staying?" she said. "If that's all right with you," he said. Fern considered this for approximately 1 second. "You can stay," she said, "but don't interrupt. Mrs. Crane doesn't like interruptions during the lesson." Rupert looked at Sophia over Fern's head. Sophia said nothing. Something in her face said, "She's right, and she is also the best thing I have built here, and now you know it." He sat in the chair by the wall. He folded his hands. He did not say a word. Fern read, clear and careful, 3 pages further than the week before. She made one mistake and corrected it herself before Sophia could speak. She looked up with the contained satisfaction of someone who has done a thing well and is certain of it. "Good," Sophia said, "very good." Fern went back to the page. The December morning settled around them. Rupert sat in the chair by the wall and watched a girl learn to read in his wife's aunt's kitchen, and the expression on his face was not performance and was not ease, but was something truer than either, the face of a man, encountering something important for the first time, and having the sense to simply be quiet in the presence of it. Sophia looked up once and caught his eye. He did not look away. She did not look away either. This was where it started. Not the public correction, not the 3 visits, not the terms she had named, and he had accepted without amendment. This quiet room, this open primer, this cold December light coming through Luella's windows. 2 people on either side of a life they had both damaged, and were both, separately and together, beginning to rebuild into something true. It was not a grand beginning, but it was an honest one. And for the first time in 2 years and 3 months, that was exactly enough.